I want to start off with how you got into the CIA, because every young man or woman that wants to do something adventurous and patriotic for the country is like, would think it would be a dream to be in the CIA, but you spent a career in the CIA and now still involved in that world. So how did you get into the CIA?
It honestly isn't that interesting. And I always tell people, so I just applied online and everyone's always so disappointed, especially during our era, right? When it wasn't as common. Now you have to apply online for every job.
No one walked up to you at a coffee shop.
No, which is so disappointing, right? Because then I don't have a cool story. But when I was in grad school, my focus was on Kashmir, which I wasn't really thinking through it at the time. And so when I went to graduate, I was like, oh, I did Kashmir. Like, where am I going to get a job? This is like so useless, right? So the only two places really I could work is probably CIA and State Department. So the night I was practicing to defend my thesis, I went on the CIA website and I applied. So that was like Halloween, and they interviewed me at the beginning of December. So it moved pretty quick.
Yeah. What would you originally apply for?
I applied for an analyst.
Okay. So that's where you kind of cut your teeth, and being involved with working with the CIA. I didn't know the targeting aspect. So you were not only a CIA analyst, but you were a CIA targeter. Can you explain the difference between those two jobs?
Yeah. Well, the funny part is, so the targeter wasn't on the website at the time, but as you know, when you go to the website, you don't know what the jobs are anyway. So I applied to analyst, and then the first week at the CIA, they put you in a room with everyone who was hired. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm not like any of these analysts. Like, I'm hired in the wrong place. So the second week you go sit in your office, and I go into my boss and I said, I think I'm going to resign. He's like, why are you going to resign? I said, you guys hired me as an analyst and this is not the job for me. Like, I should be in the operations side. And so it was that day he said, well, we have something called a targeting analyst, and I'll just put you in that track, and then you can just be, a targeter for your career here at the CIA. So that's actually how it happened. I was actually going to leave because I didn't want to be an analyst.
What is that job? Like, what makes it different?
Yeah, so the difference is really, like, for an analyst, it's your standard, you are answering questions to policymakers. And so you kind of write reports and say, here's our assessment of what's going on the ground. It's a little more slower paced. And then a targeter, you're directly supporting operations. And most of the operations are you identifying a person. So it could be a capture operation, but it also could be identifying a person who can fill a gap, right? Like, I don't know, some Iranian scientist who fills, a piece of information the U.S. government doesn't have.
Okay. When you say like operations, are you primarily working with CIA's like Ground Branch or JSOC? Like who's doing these the capture kill type operations? Are you working directly with them?
Yeah. So basically, the day-to-day job, you work obviously with the case officers,
Sure.
But then if you move to an operational level, depending on where you are, if you're in a war zone, if you're in a foreign country, you might work with special operations or ground branch, or you might just work with that foreign government special operations.
Oh, really? I didn't even think about that side of it. Yeah, that's so we kind of crossed paths a little bit. Like, I think we missed each other by 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I was in Pakistan. I was working in the federally administered tribal area, Afghanistan, on the Pakistan side. But I was on that side of the border, and I left in April of 2007, and you came there August of 2007 and worked that area a lot. I think till 2011. You worked that area. And so can you tell us, I don't know what you can or cannot say about the operations you did in Afghanistan and Pakistan as an officer, as a targeter, and to what type of operations you did to catch bad guys or capture or kill bad guys?
Sure. Really what my focus was, it was kind of interesting. I worked Pakistani militants, but it would be anyone who was utilized in some way by al-Qaeda. So what al-Qaeda would do is they would plan attacks in Pakistan, and then they would use local groups to carry out those attacks for multiple reasons, but mostly because they were more effective. So they would use like Lashkar-e-Jhangvi was a very popular one, and that was my main group. And then they would use, Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, which is TTP, and we call it the Pakistani Taliban. So that was primarily my focus. And then I got to a point where there was an opening in like the Afghanistan shop, and they asked me if I would come take the position, and that was targeting the top 3 leaders of the Afghan Taliban. So that's when I switched over from targeting Pakistani terrorists to an Afghan terrorist. And so I did that. for a year. And then after bin Laden was captured, Pakistan had stopped the visas for Americans. And so I volunteered to go back to Pakistan because I had a visa and they were short staffed. So that was my last trip, is after bin Laden's capture.
Wow. In that time, in my time, from being involved, from the years I was involved, the terrorist groups seem to have rotated like by name and by groups. Like, even though I've been involved in that, I still am confused on who some of these groups are. And this is kind of one of your expertise. So who would you say during that time were the top groups in that region that were operating? I mean, of course, the Taliban, but you talk about Al-Qaeda, how Al-Qaeda integrated with the Taliban, ISIS-K, like how those interacted.
Yeah, those early years, it was really the priority was Al-Qaeda. And then the priority was what was becoming the TTP. So the big target was Baitullah Masood.
Mm-hmm.
So he, was one of the terrorists in Waziristan. And he's the one who ended up doing the Bhutto assassination. So Benazir Bhutto. So he was kind of the big player. And then Al-Qaeda had certain people who they would assign to work with Pakistani militants or do external operations. And so those were the focus, as you can imagine. So one, his name was Sheikh Isa al-Masri. He was based in Lahore. And it was his job to link up Al-Qaeda with the Pakistani militants. So that was important, obviously, since we were based in Pakistan. So that was a huge focus.